Barely after the guns fell silent in Gaza, violence erupted less than 200 kilometers away in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin. Israel's military pulled up its tanks, snipers, and special forces into the city on Tuesday, 3 days after a delicate ceasefire came into effect in Gaza, pausing nearly 470 days of relentless bombardment. In the West Bank and across multiple Palestinian cities, Israeli forces created new checkpoints, stopped people from accessing life-saving medical care, blocked ambulances and paramedics from reaching bodies that lay on the streets, as civilians hid in their homes, afraid of what's to come. A day later, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that security forces have launched Operation, Iron Wall, in an attempt to crack down on what they called terrorists, mainly affiliated with Iran. But videos have surfaced showing unarmed Palestinians being targeted and shot at by Israeli forces. In one instance, a bullet barely misses the feet of an elderly man walking in the street. 10 people were killed on the first day alone, and at least 40 others were injured in Jenin, with promises by Israeli government extremists of annexing the West Bank entirely. But Israel's moves in the West Bank haven't gone unnoticed. Roland Frederick, the West Bank director of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, said 2,000 families are already displaced and Jenin camp has become nearly uninhabitable, especially when taking into consideration that the Jenin camp has been under siege by a different force altogether for nearly 50 days, the Palestinian Authority. Speaking during the World Economic Forum at Davos, Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi warned that Israel's incursion is dangerous and could cause the West Bank to, explode. But Netanyahu said that the raids there will be extensive and significant. With a ceasefire narrowly in place in Gaza, could the West Bank be another flashpoint for long-term violence? This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. This week, we follow the developments in the West Bank with a closer look at Israel's operations in Jenin, and we try to understand what all of this could mean for Gaza's fragile truce and what the future holds for the occupied Palestinian territories as a whole. Israel's military raids in Jenin come on the heels of another deadly crackdown that the Palestinian Authority, or the PA, has been conducting there since December last year. In a rare show of force, militarized Palestinian security personnel besieged the camp, claiming to be targeting outlaws, people with outstanding warrants for their arrest or criminal activity, and those with links to Iran. There were signs that the PA was starting to withdraw, but residents of Jenin have told the National that they seem to be targeted by Israeli forces inside the camp and by Palestinian forces surrounding it. I spoke to the spokesman for the ruling Palestinian party Fatah, Ahmed Fatouh, to understand the motives for these two operations and what they mean for Jenin and the West Bank. Up until a few days ago, the Palestinian Authority was inside Jenin camp. Can you tell us about the Palestinian Authority's role inside Jenin camp and what has happened since then from the Israeli side?
The operation before this aggression of Israel, and by the way, this aggression of Israel is aiming straight forward as a way to undermine the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority security forces operation was to preserve the law against a group of outlaws. Some of them wanted for criminal cases to the court, who refused to respect this law, refused to respect this court, as well as some of them are affiliated with Iran and the external powers that does not serve the Palestinian national cause. Unfortunately, the occupation invaded Jenin, and it actually clashed with the Palestinian security forces at the beginning. One security officer has been killed, and many were injured. They have destroyed the streets, they have shot at civilians, they have done horrible things to the people. This comes as a part of Israel's plan to annex the West Bank, to destroy the livability of the Bank. And their aim since the beginning of this war has nothing to do with Hamas or any other faction. It is an extermination war against the Palestinian people. Wherever there's a Palestinian identity, wherever there's a Palestinian culture, wherever there is a Palestinian city that is rising, they want to destroy it and bring us down to rubble.
The Palestinian Authority warned ahead of its siege on Jenin camp that it was doing this to prevent exactly what is going on from happening, to prevent Israel from actually raiding the camps, from cracking down on what they call terrorists. But at the end of the day, it still happened anyway.
Israeli occupation's ambition is colonialism, it's expansion, it does not care about any reason or any evidence. Now, what happened in the West Bank? This is going on since the beginning of October 7. What happened after the ceasefire? They moved their troops to West Bank, which shows a clear intention that Israel is aiming to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian and the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is, to them, a threat. The Palestinian Authority represents the Palestinian identity, represents the Palestinian legitimacy, represents the Palestinian voice. It is a recognized government all over the world. It is leading the ICC case against Netanyahu and Gallant and the war criminals. Of course, they will do everything in their power to undermine this authority and to show this authority as, against its own people sometimes, or to show it as illegal and weak. Now, the people have shown unity over the Palestinian Authority, over the PLO, because we know that it works for a pure Palestinian agenda, nothing else.
As you said, there was a Palestinian security official that was killed in the beginning of this so-called military operation by Israel inside Jenin. Do you worry that Palestinian security forces are going to clash with Israel inside?
The Palestinian Authority are wise enough to try its every effort not to bring this into a full clash. That's exactly what Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Netanyahu want. They want to use that to make a full-out war. So the Palestinian Authority immediately was aware and pulled back its forces. We support the popular peaceful resistance as a method of resisting apartheid, resisting this persecution, oppression that has been on our lands for 76 years, through our popular demonstrations, with our call for peace and unity.
Would you say that the Palestinian Authority is supportive of armed resistance against Israel inside Jenin camp?
No, I didn't say that. I'm supporting the people. They are supporting political power. They are supporting, fixing the streets, fixing the electricity, giving aid, giving health care to the wounded, and putting all the pressure to make this aggression stop.
So what are the armed groups, the resistance groups, supposed to be doing in all of this when it comes to an Israeli raid? Are they not supposed to react?
Unfortunately, when this invasion happened, most of those claimed resistance groups ran away. So unfortunately, as I told you, they are Iranian groups and are using money for their own interest. They haven't done any harm to the Israeli occupation. The biggest harm that has been done against Israel, I think, is what the PA and Fatah has done when they brought Netanyahu, the war criminal, to the ICC and the ICJ. It is pointless to fight a nuclear power with AK-47. We are in Fatah wise enough to see. Now, of course, Fatah has been in the forefront of resistance since 1965, and we have done the second win, where the Palestinian security forces were in the forefront of the resistance, and they provided the highest number of mortars, the highest number of prisoners, the highest number of inflicting damage to the enemy. But what was the result? The result was nothing, unfortunately, fruitful for the Palestinian cause. We didn't bring the Palestinian state. So in 2009, we have adopted as a Fatah the popular peaceful resistance.
But the Palestinians have an international right for armed resistance against Israel. And so if the armed resistance groups inside Jenin decide to not fight back, then what happens? Do you think that Israel would withdraw, for example, from Jenin camp and stop its raids?
But they are not fighting back, isn't it? Maybe in the news they show them as fighting back. But if you look at Jenin, open the Facebook and go to the Jenin pages, there's almost no clashes from them against the Israeli occupation. They run away.
So what is the Palestinian Authority's role during this?
They are doing much efforts in aiding and supporting the Palestinian people. For instance, what happened in Tulkarem refugee camp, for about around 5 or 6 months, the Palestinian Authority rebuilt the camp and fixed many of the issues that has been damaged by the occupation. It also supported the wounded and the martyrs' families. It's doing its role by solidifying the Palestinian, unity and the Palestinian existence in their own lands, helping them to remain in their houses, to remain in their neighborhoods, and to give them every sort of aid. Of course, it's doing it's leading the political campaign in the international arena. And we have been instrumental in changing many ideas and many thoughts about what's going on in Palestine to make them take positions, such as those sanctions that have been applied in Europe and in the United States. And we are still pressuring more for more and more sanctions.
After barely having had enough time to breathe a sigh of relief in Gaza, and as they try to pick up the pieces of all that they have lost there, Palestinians are now worried about what is happening inside the West Bank itself and how all of this will affect them. I speak to Palestinian political analyst Khalil Saigh to understand whether the events in Jenin and other cities may compromise the truce agreement in Gaza and potentially start another battlefront within occupied Palestine. Israel has dubbed its operation in Jenin, quote-unquote, Iron Wall. Some people have interpreted the name as a reference to a colonization manifesto, and you also saw Finance Minister Smotrich and Defense Minister Katz say that the operation will protect settlers and settlements. We also saw Donald Trump removing sanctions from settlers. Is this entire operation by Israel an attempt to start annexing the West Bank under the pretext of cracking down on terrorists, or is this going to be just a one-off?
To start with, the name is indeed a reference to Jabotinsky's writing. Before the existence of the State of Israel, the father of revisionist Zionism or right-wing Zionism, Jabotinsky, have written this essay called The Iron Wall. The thesis of the essay is quite simple. It says the Palestinians will always see us as colonizers. We're coming here to take their land. We will oppress them. And he says the only thing to do is to build an iron wall. And the iron wall, he didn't mean a literal iron wall, but he meant like we have to really decisively win against the Arabs, as he called them, the Palestinians, and build this iron wall so that they are deterred. Once we deter the Palestinians, they will acknowledge the reality, and then we will come to terms with them and we will build peace. But today, Israel has taken it to the second step. I think that Bibi and others who supposedly followed the Jabotinsky thinking have believed in the iron wall forever, meaning that you wouldn't get to a point where you deter the Palestinians and come to peace with them. Now, the annexation has been happening, has been creeping. We have to be honest with ourselves. There is a de facto annexation of the West Bank. All what is needed is an official move to annex the West Bank. I don't think Israel needs that. I really don't, because it will give them much more noise in the public arena, especially among the international community, and they don't need that. However, when it comes to the timing of this operation, one has to pose the question why. And I think the reason why the timing is at that time is that Benjamin Netanyahu had to make a compromise to Smotrich to make him stay in the government. Smotrich has opposed the ceasefire in Gaza. He called it surrender. He threatened to leave the government. And in return, Benjamin Netanyahu told him, listen, this is not the end of the war. And to prove to you that this is not the end of the war on the Palestinians, not on Hamas, not on the armed groups, we will get to Jenin and we will restore, quote unquote, security in Judea and Samaria to prove to you that we are still in war. And in addition to that, from a security point of view, this comes only 4 days after the Palestinian Authority has reached an agreement with the armed groups.
Can you tell us about this agreement that the Palestinians reached with the armed groups? And can you also give us the context on how this all looks in terms of optics?
PA has been calling this operation they had, which means defense of or protecting the homeland. And the logic is very simple, as the BA would say, in order to prevent a scenario such as that the Israeli military will come to Jenin, we have to do it. We have to police the area. We have to prevent resistance group and other armed groups, as they call them, lawless groups, from having weapons, etc. So to prevent the Israeli plan of getting in, ethnic cleansing, destroying Jenin, replicating Gaza. That's the PA logic. They've arrested over 250 armed members. They've reached an agreement with some of the armed members to give up their weapons, the explosion devices from the Jenin refugee camp in the last few weeks. The agreement that was reached with the armed groups wasn't really clear. The PA never published a memo. There is no document signed between both sides. But the agreement, vaguely, what the Palestinian Authority and the armed groups have stated, that it will keep the resistance, quote unquote, in the refugee camp, but it wouldn't allow for any member of the quote unquote resistance to stay in the refugee camp with their weapon if they have a criminal record. So from an Israeli point of view, this is a failure. Now, the Israelis didn't want to see that. They wanted to see the entire armed group disarmed in Jenin. That's one. And they also saw it as an opportunity, as I said, because Smotrich wanted to see more war in the West Bank.
Is Israel stepping in also to tell the Palestinian Authority that you have failed inside Jenin? Because as you exactly said, the Palestinian Authority was saying that we have to do this to prevent Israel from coming in. And then what happened? Israel came in. So is Israel going to expand, do you think, this operation into the wider West Bank? Is there a fear that this is going to turn into a third intifada? Is the violence going to escalate, or is it going to be targeted siege, raid, confrontations as we've been seeing over the past years?
For sure, this is a message to the PA that you have failed. And the truth is, on the Israeli government side, there has been always hope that the Palestinian Authority will fail. There is disagreement within Israel between the security apparatus and between the government. The security apparatus, it's a professional security apparatus, right? Like they're interested in keeping security of the state of Israel. And to these people, it makes sense that the PA will continue to do this. They look at the PA as effective mechanism, and they think that the PA is actually lacking funding, lacking support. And they always suggest that the government will increase the funding and the support for the PA. The government, though, refuses that. And they look at the Palestinian Authority as liability. Why their liability? Because they are capable of proving to Trump, to the Americans, to others that they are actually against quote-unquote terror and that they can actually run a state. So there was this hope among the Israeli government. And I think with the coming of Trump and the moves that the Palestinian Authority is trying to do with the Trump administration and the Arab countries as well, to try to say that they can go and run Gaza, that they can actually ensure the security agreements with Israel, this is a move by the Israeli government to say, no, they can't. Now, would it expand to the rest of the region or not? I don't know. I think it has been already creeping in other areas. We've seen arrests in Tulkarem, we've seen arrests in Ramallah and other places. But on this massive scale, I don't think so, because Israel needs some sort of justification. And until now, there hasn't been enough armed groups in other regions like Tulkarem or Ramallah and others. But it's also important to bring the other element of who is in the picture too as well. Hamas is in the picture. Yesterday, in an interview with Al Jazeera, Bahrain, who is the leader of Hamas in the West Bank, obviously speaking from Turkey, has said that the same way we defeated Israel in Gaza, we'll defeat it in the West Bank. And in a way, this is a dangerous optics that also Hamas is giving to the Israelis, because if you say, hey, we're in the West Bank and we can do the same thing, you are literally providing the pretext for Israel to do more.
Obviously, the West Bank is not isolated from Gaza, even though it's viewed as such. Right now, we have seen the release of 3 hostages from Hamas into Israel on Saturday in exchange for the release of 90 Palestinian detainees from Israeli prisons, all of them from the West Bank. But then Israel went back to the West Bank and cracked down again and arrested around 60 people. Some of them have been released. Does all of the activity in the West Bank have an impact on the situation in Gaza and on the ceasefire and its stability?
So the unfortunate reality that both sides have agreed that the West Bank is outside of the agreement. Right after the agreement, Hamas leadership has made a statement that while we have a ceasefire in Gaza, our battle with the occupation in the West Bank continues. So they were very clear that the West Bank is not part of the equation. Now, when it comes to arrest, that has been always the critique of Hamas's methodology, actually, that you release people, you pay a high price for it, thousands of people get killed, but then Israel re-arrests them, and there is no mechanism to enforce the agreements that you've signed. Now, if Israel has arrested people who were released with the deal, I think that this violates the terms of the deal. But there is no amendment that they shouldn't arrest other people in the West Bank. And I think that the arrest will continue to happen. And I don't think there is any mechanism to prevent that. So it's up to Hamas whether they want to emphasize that and choose to say, look, this is being violated. We want to go after it and invoke that ceasefire has been broken, but I don't think Hamas wants to do that. Hamas is more interested in working out an image of victory. Hamas is already declaring that they're victorious in Gaza. They're pushing this narrative in the PR, etc. And they're not interested in talking about the shortcoming of the agreement. Even we've seen a violation of the ceasefire 2 days ago in Gaza, where 10 people were killed in Rafah by Israeli forces. They literally shot them, including 15-year-old kid. Hamas didn't comment on it, etc., because they're not interested in that. If they violated the ceasefire, they understand that they might not get better terms in the future.
While all of this is unfolding in the West Bank and in the very early and fragile stages of a ceasefire in Gaza, one important question looms. Who is going to actually govern Gaza, sort out the distribution of aid, rebuild the nearly completely annihilated enclave, and make sure that security is maintained throughout that process? And so far, no one can seem to agree. Not Fatah, not Hamas, not Israel, or the international community. In the next few weeks, and as these discussions begin as part of Phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement, we'll take a closer look at the issue of governance. Stay tuned for our conversation on this soon on Beyond the Headlines, which airs every Friday. This episode was produced by Ban Barqawi and audio engineered by Arthur Edison. Yasmin Al-Taji is our assistant producer and Dua Farid is our editor, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. Thank you for listening.